The temperature had dropped below zero by the time Elena Hart pressed her ear against the kitchen door. She told herself she wasn't eavesdropping. She told herself she just wanted a glass of water. But the truth was, she had heard her father's voice carrying that particular flatness. The tone that meant numbers. The tone that meant debt, and her feet had stopped of their own accord on the cold hardwood floor. She's no use to this family anyway. That was her father, Robert Hart, who collected stamps and opinions in equal measure. She's 24 years old and barren. You understand what that means? No grandchildren, no leverage. She's a mouth we feed. Elena pressed her hand against the doorframe to steady herself. Outside, snow was falling so thickly the street lamps had blurred into pale smears of light. Cedar Hollow in December looked like a photograph left too long in the sun, all its edges dissolved. The man her father was speaking to was named Gerald Pruitt. He owned half the commercial property on Elm Street and held 3 of her father's unpaid notes. He was 62 years old and smelled of pipe tobacco and old money, and he had been circling the Hart family's misfortune for a year like a patient crow. "I don't need a wife," Pruitt said. "I need someone to look after Daniel Cole's kid. He's been asking around for a live-in caretaker since October. Decent man, but rough around the edges. Widower. His little girl hasn't talked right since the accident." A pause. "I'll forgive 2 of the 3 notes if you send her out there. The 3rd one I'll extend another 6 months. Elena didn't move. She thought about the word he had used. Barren. She had heard it from the doctor's office the previous spring, delivered in the gentle, clinical language that made devastation sound like paperwork. There would be no children. Her body had failed at the one function her mother had always insisted was a woman's primary purpose. And now that failure was currency. "She'll go," her father said. No one asked Elena. She packed 1 bag, a wool sweater, 3 paperback novels she had read before but loved enough to read again. A photograph of her grandmother, who had died the winter Elena turned 12. At the bottom of the bag, she placed a small leather notebook in which she had been writing stories since she was 9 years old. Fairy tales, mostly, about women who survived impossible things. Her mother stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching, and did not say a word. The drive to the Cole property took 40 minutes through roads that had not been properly plowed. The man who drove her, one of Pruitt's employees, a quiet fellow named Ray, said nothing the entire journey except "almost there," as they turned off the main road onto a narrow lane through dark pines. The headlights swept across snow-buried fence posts and a wooden mailbox that read "Cole" in peeling black paint. The house came into view slowly, the way things do in storms. First the yellow glow of a single downstairs window, then the silhouette of a broad porch, then the house itself, which was larger than she had expected. 2 stories. Fieldstone, chimney, woodpile stacked high against the east wall like a fortress. Ray stopped the car and said, Elena got out. The cold hit her face like a closed fist. She stood in the driveway with her bag over one shoulder and looked at the house, and the house gave nothing back. The yellow window glowed. Snow fell without sound. Somewhere deep in the pine trees, something, a branch, perhaps, or an animal, snapped under the weight of ice. She walked to the door and knocked. The man who opened it was not what she had pictured. She had imagined someone older, defeated, worn down to resignation. Daniel Cole was perhaps 32, dark-haired, with the kind of stillness in his face that looked less like peace and more like something locked. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up, despite the cold pouring in through the open door. He looked at her the way you look at weather, gauging it, not judging it. "Elena Hart," he said. "Yes." He stepped back to let her in. "Mia's already asleep. I'll show you your room. Rules in the morning." That was all. She followed him down a hallway that smelled of wood smoke and pine sap, past a living room where a fire had burned itself down to orange coals, past a closed door from behind which she could hear the slow, even breathing of a child. He stopped at a room near the back of the house, small, clean, a single bed with a blue quilt, a window that faced the dark tree line. "Bathroom across the hall," he said. "Breakfast at 6? Mia wakes at 7. She doesn't talk much." "All right," Elena said. He left without another word. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house settle around her. The fire ticked. Snow struck the window pane in soft, persistent waves. She was not in her own home. She had not chosen to be here. She had been moved, like a piece of furniture, from one room of her life to another, and no one had consulted her about the arrangement. She opened her leather notebook and wrote a single line. "The coldest rooms are sometimes the ones with the most warmth waiting in them." Then she closed it and tried to sleep. Morning came gray and without ceremony. Elena was up before the alarm she had set on her phone, standing at the kitchen window in the blue pre-dawn light, watching the snow that had fallen overnight, erasing every track and line from the property until the yard looked unmarked, like paper before a story begins. She found coffee in the cabinet above the stove, found the kettle, found 3 eggs and a block of cheese in the refrigerator. She made breakfast without instruction and had it on the table by 5:50. Daniel appeared at 6 precisely. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, eggs, coffee, toast, and then at her. Something crossed his face, too brief to read. He sat down. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I was awake." He drank his coffee and ate without speaking further. Elena ate standing by the counter, which seemed like the right thing to do, because she had not yet been told she was allowed to sit at the table as an equal rather than a position. After a moment he said, without looking up, "Sit down. You're making me uncomfortable." She sat down. Mia appeared at 7:03, padding into the kitchen in socks and a nightgown printed with small yellow foxes. She was 6 years old. Her hair was dark like her father's, pulled into 2 uneven braids that had mostly escaped whatever had tied them. She stopped at the kitchen doorway and looked at Elena the way animals look at strangers, not hostile, but careful, measuring. "This is Elena," Daniel said. "She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping out." Mia looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she went to her chair and climbed into it and held out her cup for milk. She did not speak. Elena learned quickly that the house ran on a set of rhythms as fixed as tides. Daniel left for work at 7:30. He managed a timber operation 15 miles north, gone before the roads got worse, and returned at 5. In between, it was Elena and Mia, and the particular silence of a child who had chosen not to use words as currency. Mia communicated through pointing, through the arrangement of objects, through the kind of expressive silences that children develop when they have learned the adults around them are unreliable narrators. She was not, Elena realized, a child who could not speak. She was a child who had decided not to. There was a difference. The rules Daniel had promised in the morning arrived as a typewritten list left on the kitchen counter, which struck Elena as formal and also, somehow, endearing. Cook 1 hot meal for dinner. Keep the wood stove fed between noon and 4 when the boiler struggled. Mia must wear her hat outdoors even if she protests. No television after 7. Read to her before bed. That last item had been underlined. That first evening, Elena sat on the edge of Mia's bed with a copy of a fairy tale collection she had found on the shelf in the hallway, old cloth-covered book, spine cracked and re-glued, and began to read. She did not do what adults often do with children's stories, which is to flatten their voice into a lullaby drone. She read the way she had always wanted someone to read to her, with weight, with the pauses in the right places, with the understanding that a good story earns its ending. She was 3 pages in when she noticed it. The strip of yellow light under the bedroom door, the hallway light that had been joined by the darker shadow of feet. Someone was standing in the hall. She kept reading. When she finished the story, Mia's eyes were closed and her breathing had slowed to sleep. Elena closed the book softly and stood and crossed to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, but the kitchen light was on, and when she passed it, there was a second coffee cup on the counter that had not been there before. It became a ritual without either of them naming it. Every evening, Elena read to Mia. The fairy tale collection ran out after 9 days, so she moved to the novels she had brought, selecting passages she thought a 6-year-old could hold on to even without understanding every word. The sensory parts, the ones with weather and animals and motion. Then she began telling stories she invented herself, pulling them from the same instinct that had filled her leather notebook since childhood. She told a story about a woman who found a door in the side of a mountain that led to a room full of everything she had lost. She told a story about a horse that could run so fast it traveled between seasons. She told a story about a man who had frozen in place during a terrible winter, and the slow, patient fire that thawed him. She didn't plan that last one. It arrived in her mouth the way true things sometimes do. The shadow under the door was always there by the second story. On the 12th night, she paused mid-sentence. The woman with the mountain door had just stepped inside and said, without raising her voice or turning toward the door, "There's a chair in the hallway. You don't have to stand." Silence. Then, after a long moment, the faint sound of a chair being moved. She continued the story. He never came inside the room. That seemed to matter to him. The way rules matter to people who have very little control over things, keeping the boundary made the listening acceptable, made it something other than what it was. Elena did not press it. She understood the architecture of distance, the way people build rooms within rooms to protect what they cannot afford to expose. She had lived in that architecture herself for years. During the days, Daniel remained what he was: brief, functional, occasionally issuing instructions about the woodpile or the truck that needed its tires checked. He was not unkind. He was not warm. He operated at a frequency that reminded her of a radio station picked up through static, audible, but requiring effort to interpret. Mia, by contrast, had begun to thaw in small ways. She allowed Elena to braid her hair in the mornings. She would sit beside Elena on the kitchen bench while Elena made lunch, and though she said nothing, she had developed a habit of leaning her weight incrementally against Elena's arm, the way small animals press against warmth. It was not words. It was something older than words. On the 14th night, Elena told the story of the frozen man again. This time she gave him a name. She called him Thomas, which was nobody's name in this house, and she gave him a daughter who had also learned to be still and cold because the world was safer that way. In the hallway, the chair did not move, but when she passed it on her way to bed, she saw that whoever had been sitting in it had stayed a long time. The wool of the seat held the warmth of a body, the kind that fades slowly. She put her hand on it briefly, the way you touch something that belongs to someone else. Then she went to her room and wrote in her notebook until the lamp flickered and the wind found the crack in the window frame, and she wrapped herself in the blue quilt and listened to the storm come in off the mountains. On the 16th day, the boiler failed. It happened at 2 in the afternoon, which was the worst possible time. Daniel, still 4 hours from home. The temperature outside falling steadily, Mia napping upstairs under 3 blankets. Elena discovered it when she went to add wood to the stove and realized the stove was fine, but the radiators in the upstairs rooms had gone cold. She found the boiler in the basement, which smelled of old iron and stone. She had no idea how to repair a boiler. She knew, however, how to call someone who did, and she found Daniel's number in the list on the kitchen corkboard and called it. He answered on the second ring. "Unusual. The boiler stopped," she said. "I don't know how to. Is Mia warm?" "She's sleeping. I put extra blankets. Bring her downstairs to the main room. Keep the wood stove going. I'll call Marcus. He's 20 minutes closer. Don't go in the basement again. The floor near the water heater is soft." He hung up. She did what he said. She lifted Mia, who woke and blinked and did not protest being carried, which was itself a kind of trust, and brought her to the main room, where she built the fire back up until the stones around the hearth were radiating heat in slow, steady waves. They sat together on the floor in front of it, Mia still wrapped in her blanket, and Elena held up the leather notebook and showed her the sketches she sometimes made in the margins of her stories. Small figures, trees, the shapes of animals she had seen from the window. Mia pointed at a drawing of a fox. "You like foxes," Elena said. It was not a question. Mia nodded. "Me too. They're very clever animals. They survive things." Elena turned to a blank page and drew a fox sitting in a snowstorm, its tail wrapped around itself for warmth. Mia leaned forward, watching the pen move. The repairman, Marcus, arrived in 40 minutes rather than 20. He was a cheerful, weathered man in his 50s who tracked boot prints across the kitchen floor and pronounced the boiler ornery but fixable and had it running in an hour. By the time Daniel came home, the house was warm again and Mia was asleep against Elena's shoulder on the sofa. He stood in the doorway of the main room and looked at them for a moment. Elena met his eyes over the top of Mia's dark head and said quietly, so as not to wake her, "She's fine. It's all fine." He nodded. He looked at his daughter's sleeping face. Something moved through his expression: grief, she thought, or something adjacent to it. Something that had taken up permanent residence in the same part of his face where other people kept their ordinary feelings. "She used to do that with her mother," he said. "Fall asleep on her." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife. Elena waited. "Avalanche," he said, eventually, as if the word had been sitting in his chest for 3 years, and this was the first time he'd allowed it to leave. "We were hiking. Out of season. I wanted to go and she came because she always came, and I was the one who chose the trail." He looked away from Mia's sleeping face, back at the fire. She was 29. "I'm sorry," Elena said. He shook his head slightly, not dismissing the condolence, just not knowing what to do with it. Then he went to the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of something hot and set one near Elena's free hand without speaking, and sat in the armchair across from her. And they stayed like that for a while, the fire going between them, Mia breathing steadily between them, the snow pressing at the windows. It was the longest they had been in the same room without purpose. The storm that hit Cedar Hollow on the 21st day was the kind the old-timers described as once a decade. Not just heavy snow, but the brutal alchemy of ice and wind that stripped power lines, overturned plows, and reduced the world to whatever was immediately in front of you. It began at dusk. By 8 in the evening, the lights had gone out, and Elena was moving through the house with a flashlight, checking windows, lighting the oil lanterns she had found in the pantry and arranged on the kitchen table against exactly this possibility. Mia was awake and frightened. Not screaming, she was not a screaming child, but sitting at the top of the stairs with her knees drawn up and both hands pressed flat against the top step, her breathing shallow and rapid in the way breathing gets when a child's nervous system is making too many calculations at once. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, carrying a lantern. She sat on the step below Mia and placed the lantern between them so the light went up into both their faces. She didn't reach for the child. She didn't explain that everything was fine, because that would be a lie and Mia was too intelligent for lies. Instead, she said, "I'm a little scared too. The wind is very loud." Mia looked at her. "When I was little," Elena said, "and it stormed, my grandmother would take all the pillows and blankets from the whole house and build a fort in the living room. Not to hide, just to make a softer place inside the noise." She paused. "Do you want to try that?" Mia stood up. They built the fort together, Elena carrying the heavy blankets, Mia arranging them with surprising authority, tucking corners and draping panels until they had constructed something solid enough to feel like a room inside the room. Elena crawled in with the lantern, and Mia followed, and they sat shoulder to shoulder on the pile of pillows, and Elena opened her notebook and began to tell a story. Slow and low, about 2 people sheltering inside a winter storm, who discover the storm is actually very old and very tired, and just wants someone to witness it. Outside, the wind rose and fell. The lantern threw warm shadows against the walls of blankets. Mia fell asleep with her head on Elena's knee. Daniel had been outside when the worst of it hit. He had gone to clear the branch that the forecasters had warned was likely to come down across the drive, a large pine, half dead, leaning toward the house. He came back inside an hour later, and Elena heard the change in his movement before she saw him. Something careful, compensated. She met him in the kitchen with the lantern. He was holding his left forearm against his chest. The chainsaw kicked, he said, which was his version of, "I'm hurt." She made him sit at the kitchen table. She found the first aid kit in the cabinet below the sink, well stocked, which told her something about how this man lived, and she cleaned the gash along his forearm with the methodical focus she used when she needed her hands to be calmer than the rest of her. It was not a wound that required stitches, just close attention and the kind of pressure that stops things. He was quiet throughout. She could feel the tension in his arm the way the muscles were set, holding still by force rather than ease. When she finished taping the bandage, her fingers paused on his wrist for a moment without quite releasing it. Neither of them moved. "I had a first aid course," she said. Not an explanation. Something to say into the silence. "I noticed," he said. She let go. He looked at the bandaged arm and then at her and said nothing, which was, she had learned, one of his more communicative modes. "Mia's asleep," she said. "In a fort." Something almost changed in his face. A fort. She helped design it. It's architecturally sound. He was quiet a moment. "Thank you." The word sat between them differently than it had when he'd said it the first time, about the breakfast she hadn't needed to make. This was heavier, more honest. "You don't have to thank me for that," Elena said. "Yes," he said. "I do." The power came back at 3 in the morning. Elena was awake. She had been awake most of the night, half watchful, listening to the storm diminish, and the sudden blaze of the kitchen light was almost violent after hours of lantern dark. She got up to turn it off and met Daniel in the hallway, which had the same effect. They were both, by any reasonable measure, fully dressed. This was Cedar Hollow, and it was December, and nobody's house was warm enough for anything else. Yet the hallway at 3 a.m., with the storm still muttering at the eaves, felt like a different category of space than the kitchen at 6 a.m. More exposed, more honest. "Can't sleep," he said. "No." He went to the kitchen, and she followed, because it seemed like the right thing. And he made the coffee that was, by now, a familiar ritual between them, and they sat at the kitchen table with the light turned low and the coffee between them. After a long time, he said, "Gerald Pruitt told me why you came." She had known this conversation would arrive. She had been dreading it the way you dread something that is going to be both painful and necessary. "What did he tell you?" "That your father owed him money. That you were offered as an arrangement." He said the last word flatly, with the particular blankness of a man who disapproves of something but has no immediate way to address it. "I want you to know I didn't ask for that. I asked Pruitt if he knew anyone who needed work. He set the terms without consulting me." "I know," she said. "Do you?" "You left me a typewritten list of rules on the first day," she said, "with itemized tasks. You're not the kind of man who traffics in people. You're the kind of man who makes lists." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, unexpectedly, "Is that good?" "It's honest," she said. "I can work with honest." The coffee went cool. Outside, snow was sliding from the roof in long, slow sheets, the particular sound of a storm exhausting itself. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. She looked at him. "With Mia." He stopped. "My wife was the one who understood children. She knew what to do when Mia cried. She had this whole language with her that I never fully learned because I assumed there was time to learn it and then there wasn't." He set down his mug. "Since Rachel died, Mia has said maybe 40 words total. You've been here 3 weeks and she leans on you like your furniture. The good kind." He said the last sentence like it surprised him to say it. "She's not doing it for me," Elena said. "She's doing it because she needs someone who stays still. Someone who doesn't." She searched for the word. "Perform. You've been performing being fine for 3 years. She can see it." Silence. "What are you performing?" he asked. It was a more precise question than she expected. "Nothing," she said. "I stopped performing a long time ago. There wasn't enough audience." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I was told I couldn't have children. My family decided that made me worthless. I've spent a year trying to figure out whether they were wrong. I think they were, but it's hard to hold on to that conclusion when the evidence all goes the other way." He looked at her with the stillness of someone who is actually listening. "You're not worthless," he said, as if this were a factual matter that had been settled and he was simply reporting the results. "I know," she said. "I just need to hear it occasionally." "I'll try to remember that," he said. She did not know, in that moment, if she wanted to laugh or cry, so she did neither. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The snow slid from the roof. The clock on the wall moved forward into the safe territory of almost morning. Mia spoke on the 26th day. It happened without preamble, without the ceremonial quality Elena had unconsciously expected. There was no particular moment that seemed to invite it. They were in the kitchen after breakfast. Daniel had already left. Mia was drawing at the table with the set of colored pencils Elena had found in a bottom drawer and cleaned up and placed in a cup, so they were available and orderly. And Elena was washing dishes and thinking about the story she was working on in her notebook. She heard the pencil stop. She turned around. Mia was looking at her drawing with a frown of dissatisfaction, the fox she had been attempting to draw, which had come out rounder and more misshapen than intended. "Wrong," Mia said. It was one word. It was said to the drawing, not to Elena, but it was a word, full and clear, and it sat in the kitchen air like something that had been held in cold storage for a very long time, and was now, slowly, learning to thaw. Elena turned back to the dishes. She did not gasp or clap or make the mistake of treating the word like an event that needed to be commemorated. She said, matter-of-factly, still looking at the window, "Foxes are hard to draw. Their ears have to be very pointed." A pause. "Show me," Mia said. That was 3 words. Elena dried her hands and sat down at the table and drew a fox in the corner of the page. Clean lines, pointed ears, the particular lilt of the tail. And Mia watched and then pulled the paper back and tried again with her round child's hand, and the second fox was better than the first, and she looked at it with the kind of satisfaction that small competencies provide. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the morning. But at lunch, she said, "More soup," which was 4 words if you counted more as a word and not just a demand, and by dinner time she had said, "The bread is good," which was a complete sentence with an article. Elena wrote in her notebook that evening, "Sometimes healing does not look like healing until it is almost complete." She did not tell Daniel immediately. It seemed important that he discover it himself, that it be his to witness without her framing it for him. But she did stay up late that night, and she heard him read to Mia. He had taken up the chair in the hallway. She realized, even on nights when Elena did not read, and she heard, through the thin wall between their rooms, the small, clear sound of Mia responding to something he said, not the words. Just the sound of a child and a father having an ordinary exchange in the dark. She pressed her hand flat against the wall between them and felt the warmth of the house and said nothing. In the morning, Daniel appeared at the kitchen table with the particular, careful blankness of someone containing a feeling that has no appropriate public form. He sat down. He looked at his coffee. Then he said, in a voice that was completely steady, "She asked me for a glass of water last night." "I know," Elena said, just like that, like she always did. "She was always going to," Elena said. "She just needed to trust that the ground was solid enough to stand on again." He looked at her. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it. But he didn't look away for a long moment, and that was something. The call from her father came on the 31st day, which was New Year's Eve. Robert Hart called at 10 in the morning, which was his businesslike hour, the hour he used for things he wanted to address without drama. Elena was alone in the house. Mia was at a neighbor's for the day, Some arrangement Daniel had made involving a child named Sophie and a family 3 miles down the road, and she stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and listened to her father explain that Pruitt had confirmed 2 of the 3 notes were cleared. 1 remained. Cole is covering the last one, her father said, as a settlement for your time. Once that goes through, you're square. You can come home. She looked out the kitchen window. The yard was white and even, the pines along the edge of the property dark green against the sky. The woodpile by the east wall had been depleted by a third over the month. When? She said. End of the week. Maybe sooner if the road's clear. She said she would be in touch and ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She was not trying to decide whether she wanted to stay. She already knew that. What she was trying to decide was what that knowledge was worth, whether wanting a thing gave her a right to it, whether the wanting itself was enough justification, whether the life she had been handed and the life she might choose were actually available in the same transaction. Daniel came home that afternoon earlier than usual. He stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Your father called me first," and she understood then that this was why he had come home early, that he had already known before she did. She nodded. "I paid the 3rd note," he said. "I know. You're free to go." He said it the way he said most things straight, without softening. "I'm not asking you to stay. I want you to understand that. I'm not using Mia as a reason for you to feel obligated, and I'm not asking you to make a decision based on—" He stopped. He looked at the ceiling briefly, based on anything other than what you actually want. She stood up from the table. "That's very considerate," she said. "I'm trying to be." "I know you are." She paused. "Why did you pay it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I didn't want the arrangement to be the reason you stayed or left. I wanted that off the table, and now it's off the table." "Yes. So, what is on the table?" He looked at her. She had learned, a very particular way of looking at things he was uncertain about. The same careful measurement he applied to weather, to load-bearing timber, to the angle of a tree that might fall. Assessing, not retreating. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like more than it is or less than it is," he said. "Try," she said. He picked up his coffee mug empty, had been empty for an hour, and set it back down. "Mia has started talking again. She woke up this morning and she told me a story. A whole story, about a fox in a snowstorm. It had a beginning and a middle and an end." He stopped. "She learned that from you." "She knew it already," Elena said. I know, but you were the one who was here." He looked at his hands. "The house was quiet for 3 years. I got used to the quiet, the way you get used to cold. You stop feeling it and you tell yourself that's all right, because you're still functioning. But functioning isn't." He stopped again. "Living," she said. "Yes." She crossed the kitchen and took the empty mug from his hands and set it in the sink. She turned around and leaned against the counter with her arms folded and said, "I don't need to be chosen because I'm useful. I need to be chosen because I'm here and I matter and the choice is made freely. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "Do you?" "Elena, do you?" "Yes," he said again, and this time it had a different weight. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to go get Mia from the neighbors. She'll be hungry and she'll want to tell you the fox story herself. Let her tell it." She took her coat from the hook and walked out into the snow. She packed on the 3rd day of January, not because she had decided to leave, or not entirely. She packed because she needed to know she could, because the difference between staying by choice and staying by inertia was, she had found, indistinguishable from the outside, but enormous on the inside. She needed to see her own things in a bag. She needed to feel the weight of that bag. She put her wool sweater in first. The 3 novels, her grandmother's photograph, the leather notebook. She sat on the edge of the bed with the bag beside her and looked at the window, which was glazed with a thin layer of frost that the morning sun was just beginning to work at. The tree line was black against a sky that had gone the particular shade of white that precedes snow. She was still sitting there when she heard the knock at her door. "Come in," she said. It was Mia. The child stood in the doorway in her fox nightgown, her dark hair loose from whatever had tied it overnight, looking at the bag on the bed with the expression of someone who has performed a calculation and arrived at a number she does not like. "You're going?" Mia said. 3 words. Perfectly clear. Elena looked at her carefully. "I'm thinking," she said. Mia came into the room and sat on the bed beside the bag, and put both her hands flat on her knees and stared at the wall. It was so perfectly the posture of someone trying very hard to be all right about something that it made Elena's chest ache. "Stay," Mia said. 1 word. She said it the way she'd said wrong to the drawing, not to Elena. Quite, but into the air between them, where it could be taken or left without either of them having to pretend it hadn't been offered. Elena looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going today," Elena said. Mia nodded. Then she got up and walked out and went back to her room, and Elena heard her door close softly, and she sat in the quiet of her own room with the bag beside her and the frost on the window, and let herself feel the full, complicated weight of being needed. She unpacked the bag. She put the wool sweater back on the hook, the novels back on the shelf, her grandmother's photograph back on the nightstand, the leather notebook back on the desk. Then she went to the kitchen and made breakfast. Daniel came down at 6 and looked at the table, eggs, coffee, toast, and then at her, and said nothing, which she had come to understand was not absence but restraint, the kind that means I see this and I'm not going to ruin it by talking. "Mia will be hungry," Elena said. "She always is," he said. He sat down. She sat down across from him. Outside, the first flakes of new snow began to fall. He came to find her on the 8th day of January. She was not at the house. She had gone to Cedar Hollow's small library open 3 days a week, staffed by a woman named Patricia, who wore her glasses on a chain of amber beads, and greeted Elena like a regular. The second time she came in to look for more books for Mia, who had developed strong opinions about story endings, and was beginning to exhaust the Cole household's collection. She was standing between 2 shelves with an armful of books when she heard the library door open and the cold from outside come in with it, and she looked up, and there was Daniel. He was still wearing his work jacket. He had not bothered to change. He came down the narrow aisle between the shelves with the same careful directness he brought to everything, and stopped 3 feet from her, which was a Daniel Cole distance, not so far as to be cold, not so close as to be something else. "I drove past the library twice," he said. "I noticed," said Patricia, from behind her desk at the end of the aisle, without looking up. Daniel did not acknowledge this. He looked at Elena. "I've been thinking about what you said. About being chosen because you're here and you matter. And," she said, "and I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond, because I don't do this well, and I'll stop if you interrupt me." She held her armful of books and waited. "I was not a good husband to Rachel in the end," he said. "Not because I didn't love her, but because I was careless. I assumed she would always be there, and I did not. I did not tell her enough or ask enough or be present enough. And then she was gone, and the only version of that I could live with was to go completely still. Stop wanting things. Stop being someone who wanted things." He stopped. Mia stopped talking because I stopped first. I realize that now. Elena didn't interrupt. "You came into this house as an arrangement," he said, "and you turned it into something I didn't know how to want anymore, and now I want it, and I don't know what to do with that except to stand in a library and tell you." He looked at the books in her arms. "I'm not asking you to forgive my family's history or the way you came here. I'm asking if you want to stay. Not because of Mia, not because of the winter, not because you have nowhere else to go. Because you want to. Because I want you to." The library was very quiet. Patricia turned a page. "You drove past the library twice?" Elena said. "3 times, said Patricia. "Patricia," Daniel said. "You're doing very well," Patricia said encouragingly. "Finish." He looked back at Elena. His jaw was set and his hands were in his jacket pockets, and he looked exactly like a man who has said the hard thing and is now waiting to find out if it was worth it. Elena set the books down on the nearest shelf. She stepped forward one step, which brought her into the range where distances collapsed and became something else, and she looked at him with the same attention she gave to the things she wrote in her leather notebook, the careful, specific honesty of someone who has learned to tell the truth because the alternative takes too much out of you. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He let out a breath. "But I need you to understand that I am not a placeholder," she said. "I am not someone you've chosen because Mia needs someone, or because the house needs someone, or because 3 years of silence was too much. I am a person who is choosing to be in your life, which means you have to be in mine, fully." "I know," he said. "Do you know what that means, practically?" "I imagine it involves talking more. It involves talking more." He almost smiled. It was the closest she had ever seen him come. "I can try that. That's all I'm asking," she said. They drove home through the snow that was falling again over Cedar Hollow, the slow, steady kind, not dramatic, just the ordinary continuation of winter, doing what winter does, the kind that muffles everything down to its essentials. The road between the library and the coal property was empty except for their headlights sweeping the white. Mia was awake when they arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with her colored pencils and a piece of paper she was filling with foxes, an entire field of them, each one slightly different from the last, each one with the pointed ears Elena had shown her. She looked up when they came in. She looked at her father. She looked at Elena. "You came back," she said. "I was always coming back," Elena said. Mia nodded once, as if this confirmed a calculation she had been running. Then she held up the drawing foxes in a snowstorm. Their tails curled around themselves for warmth and said, "For the notebook." Elena took it. She smoothed it flat and held it for a moment. This small piece of paper covered in bright-colored foxes rendered in a 6-year-old's uncertain, determined hand. Then she opened her leather notebook and tucked it inside, between the pages that held the stories she had written for this house and this child and these long winter nights. Later, after dinner, after Mia had been read to and the house had settled into its nighttime rhythms, Elena sat before the fire in the main room and wrote in her notebook. Daniel was in the chair to her left, reading, which was a new thing she had found him. A book she thought he might like, and he had started it without comment but had been reading it every evening since, which was, she had learned, how he accepted things. She wrote, "A woman who was told she had nothing to offer found a house that needed exactly what she had. The house did not know it needed her. She did not know she needed the house. This is, perhaps, how most important things begin, not with certainty, but with proximity, and the slow, stubborn willingness to remain." Outside, snow fell. The fire made its sounds. Mia's breathing, down the hall, was slow and even and sound. Elena closed the notebook. She looked at Daniel, the angle of his face in the firelight, the way he held the book, the stillness that was no longer the stillness of a man trying not to feel anything but the stillness of a man who has been given permission to rest. He looked up, held her gaze for a moment. Then he set the book face down on the arm of the chair and reached out and covered her hand with his nothing dramatic, no declaration, just the weight and warmth of it, the simple fact of contact, and went back to reading. She went back to her notebook. The snow kept falling, the way it always does, without asking for anything, without promising anything, without needing anything in return. Just falling. Just this. Just winter, making the world quiet enough, finally, to hear.